It's 2010, and this young man, whom we'll call John, is taking part in a study that will lead to some truly mind-blowing results. Yet at that moment, he has no idea. This study has demonstrated how an incredibly simple technique, one that anyone can use, can 4x the likelihood of being liked and inspiring trust in others. Approximately 3 seconds. 3 are the seconds John needed to radically transform how people perceive him. And this despite his outfit not exactly working in his favor. I know it seems unrealistic that with such minimal effort you could achieve such amazing results, but fortunately it's been proven by at least 4 different scientific studies. And let me tell you something more. You've probably already used this technique without even realizing it, and it worked brilliantly. At least that's what happened to me. The first time I used it completely unconsciously, it was like a small miracle happened. I was 20 years old, on a plane with my mom and brother, ready to leave for Albania. Unfortunately, there was a delay, over an hour. At one point, a man got up from his seat and began arguing and complaining to the flight attendants. He was visibly upset, and trust me, it was understandable. The delay alone would have been frustrating enough for anyone, but his situation was far worse. His father had just passed away, and he was on his way to the funeral. With the delay, he would not arrive in time. The flight attendants handled the situation very professionally, apologizing multiple times, but it didn't make much of a difference. Thankfully, after another 20 minutes, the plane was ready to take off, and the man eventually calmed down. The real miracle of this story isn't that we ended up arriving on time, but what happened right after. One of the flight attendants, who had to endure all the man's complaints, did something I'll never forget. The flight landed, and we all stood up. Luckily, we were in the last row of the plane, so we would be among the first to exit. But just before the door opened, I said a single sentence to this flight attendant. I still remember her reaction to this day. She looked at me, smiled, turned away for a few seconds, and took something in her hand. As she handed it to me, she said, "Thank you." It was a muffin. She had just given me a muffin. Perhaps for some this might seem trivial, but in that moment, to me, it felt like a small miracle. It was something I never would have expected to happen, and it only happened because, without even realizing it, that sentence I said contained the technique I'm about to explain to you. Toward the end of this video, I'll reveal exactly what I said to the flight attendant to earn the most satisfying muffin of my life. But if I do my job well, you'll probably be able to guess it before I tell you. Now, let's return to our friend John. Where is he? And more importantly, what is he doing? In this picture, John is at a train station. He knows he's part of a study, but he has no clue what kind of study it is. All he knows is that the researchers have asked him to approach random people and request to borrow their phones. The result of his request, nothing remarkable, only 9% of the people agreed to lend their phones to John. Just 3 out of 33 people consented. However, there's something I haven't told you yet. The researchers didn't pick random days to conduct this experiment. They waited for 2 specific days when, outside that large train station, it was raining. You might be thinking, so what? What relevance could the rain possibly have? Believe me, it has enormous relevance. Here's what happened. The study lasted 2 days, and on both days it rained. But the total number of people John approached wasn't 33, it was 65. To 33 of these individuals, he simply asked if he could borrow their phone. As I mentioned earlier, only 3 agreed. However, to the remaining 32 individuals, he made the same request, except this time, he added a simple sentence beforehand. "I'm so sorry about the rain." The result? By adding this simple phrase, the number of people who lent their phone to John increased by 422%. Yes, you heard correctly. It more than quadrupled, jumping from a mere 9% to 47%. Thus, nearly 1 out of every 2 people handed over their precious and personal phones to a complete stranger in a t-shirt. And all thanks to a phrase that took merely 3 seconds to say. This experiment is part of a larger study that consists of 4 separate experiments in total. All of them shared a clear objective: to see if superfluous apologies could somehow increase likability and trust in the eyes of others. Across all 4 studies, the conclusion was always the same. Using superfluous apologies significantly improves how others perceive us. But what exactly are superfluous apologies? They are expressions of regret for undesirable circumstances that are clearly outside of our control. However, there's one big catch. Superfluous apologies only work if they follow a strict rule. Let's go back to John's case. When he apologized for the rain, every single person he spoke to clearly knew that John had no responsibility for the rain. This seemingly insignificant detail is, in fact, what makes all the difference. Do you remember my flight to Albania? The flight attendants apologized multiple times to the man who was going to the father's funeral. So why didn't that improve the situation? After all, it was obvious that the flight attendants weren't responsible for the delay. But here's the point. Their actual responsibility isn't what matters. It's not about whether you're truly responsible for the unfortunate event, but rather how the person you're apologizing to perceives your connection to the problem. The key is perception. Let me explain this better with an example. Imagine you and I are standing in front of a bus station. You've just had a terrible day. Someone stole your wallet. You don't know who did it or how it happened. I approach you and ask if everything is okay. You tell me about the theft and I respond, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that." Chances are I'd leave a good impression on you. But now imagine you find out that I'm the one who stole your wallet. How would your perception change? The only reason my initial apology made a positive impression was because you were certain I had nothing to do with the theft. So it's not the facts that matter most, it's how they're perceived. The same thing applies to the flight attendants. Even though they weren't directly responsible for the plane's delay, the problematic passenger's perception was different. He saw the flight attendants as part of the system that caused the delay. Since they worked for the airline, they were, in some way, associated with the problem. They were seen as representatives of the company responsible for the inconvenience. In other words, when the person apologizing is perceived as part of the problem, even symbolically, the effectiveness of the apology doesn't just decrease, it can actually make things worse. It's a bit like what happens at a restaurant. If your order is late, you complain to the waiter, even though they have nothing to do with the kitchen. Now that we've understood the crucial element for superfluous apologies to work, the natural question arises: why? Why does this technique work so well? In Western cultures, apologizing or expressing regret is often associated with an admission of guilt. We use apologies when we believe we're responsible for causing harm to someone, often in the hope of being forgiven. But as we've seen, that's not always the case. In fact, in cultures like Japan, superfluous apologies are very common. When we express regret for a situation in which we bear no direct responsibility, we create an empathetic connection. Showing understanding for someone else's discomfort makes us appear as people who can put themselves in others' shoes and genuinely feel sorry for their emotional state, and we tend to like this kind of person a lot. So the next time there's traffic, a train delay, or something unpleasant happens to someone, remember to show your empathy. I bet you figured out what I said to the flight attendant, haven't you? I simply told her that I was sorry for the man's reaction.